Hello everybody and welcome back to another not applicable Formula 1 video. I hope that you're well. I hope you enjoyed the Silverstone Grand Prix as much as I did. I thought it was absolutely exceptional. A weekend of racing to remember, qualifying on Friday, our first ever sprint qualifying on Saturday, and of course the race on Sunday, which I got to spend all three of those with you guys, and I'm massively appreciative of that. Thank you everybody who joined us for those live streams, and I hope to see you again in Budapest in a few weeks' time. But let's talk Silverstone, and I'm not going to beat around the bush. Let's talk about this podium, because it was not one that we were expecting after sprint qualifying. Yes, Hamilton managed to get himself on the front row with pole position for sprint qualifying, but Max Verstappen made it look easy in sprint qualifying, becoming the first ever sprint qualifying winner in Formula 1. And then we got to the race, and this is what we ended up with. Not sure people had this down as their podium for the weekend. Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, and Valtteri Bottas. Not so sure many people had this one down, especially with Charles Leclerc leading the race for 49 laps. Let's delve into it. Obviously, everybody wants to talk about the incident between Hamilton and Verstappen. It was likely to happen at some point this season. We've seen them go toe-to-toe in continual races throughout the season. They've gone wheel to wheel, and it happened finally. And it was Lewis that came out the better of the two drivers after the incident. Honestly, I think this could have gone 50-50. I don't think Lewis Hamilton did it on purpose. I think a lot of people have said, he went up the inside and Verstappen closed the door and he should have jumped out of it. But at the end of the day, Hamilton had no idea that he was going to knock Verstappen out of the race and continue on himself. Like, it could have easily been the other way around. We could have easily just seen Hamilton's front left tyre completely obliterate itself off of the car and Max Verstappen be able to drive to an easy victory. So I don't think the shade that is being thrown at Hamilton is reasonable, and of course all of the hate that he's getting online is disgusting, and we should never have to see that in our sport. But just breaking it down individually, what I think happened and what I think should have been the repercussions, I personally think it was a bit of a racing incident. I think the door was open. Yes, it is a very high speed corner. Should you go for the move at that point on the track? Maybe, maybe not. But if you're a Formula 1 driver and you're at the pinnacle of your sport, you're battling for a Formula 1 World Championship, you're going to take any little opportunity that comes to you. And Hamilton knew he needed to catch Verstappen quickly. This was not going to be a possibility for Hamilton in lap 30, in lap 40. We saw Verstappen just drive away in Austria. We saw him just drive away in sprint qualifying at Silverstone. And Hamilton needed to take that opportunity as quickly as he possibly could. Yes, they come together. Yes, they collide. But personally, I think a 10-second penalty was warranted. Now, that is where the contention comes. Should it have been a grid penalty? Should he have had a 5-second penalty? Some people saying that he shouldn't have had a penalty at all. I'd love to know your opinion in the comments down below. Make sure you leave a comment. First of all, was it warranted that Hamilton got a penalty? Do you think it was Hamilton's fault? And secondarily, what penalty would you have given him? What do you think was actually a fair result for the race? And I don't think we're going to get to a conclusive answer, because I've seen lots of different people talk about it lots of different times, and still nobody is 100% certain on what it should have been. There's lots of different opinions out there, but it does make a massive difference when it comes to the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship. Yes, Verstappen was able to pick up those 3 points in sprint qualifying, but now we look at this. Hamilton just 8 points behind, and to be honest with you, I thought it was going to be a lot bigger a gap between these guys after Silverstone. After the sprint qualifying, Verstappen just looked electric. But Hamilton has managed to narrow that gap down to just 8 points. And it is going to go to the wire this season. I can see this going absolutely down to the last race, possibly even the last few laps of the last race. And that is something that we've been missing from Formula 1 for a few years now, and I really want to see it go all the way. So am I happy that Verstappen was out of the race? No, you should never see those incidents as a positive. Obviously, I'm so happy that he got out of that unscathed, But at the same time, it does make this championship just that little bit tastier, right? Especially the constructors as well. Just 4 points in there after Perez had a race to forget. Let's talk about the rest of the grid, though. I know that was a massive talking point, and I'd love to know your opinion in the comments below. But a second talking point we should sort of pick up is Charles Leclerc, because he was the man that was on the spot and took advantage of the fact that Hamilton and Verstappen came together. I think it's being underplayed a little bit how good that move was on Hamilton and Verstappen when they did come together at Stowe. I think you as Leclerc, you're coming into probably one of the fastest corners on the calendar. You're seeing that play out in front of you, and just in that split second, you take that advantage and get yourself in front to lead the race just before there's a red flag. He did amazingly well, by the way. And then once he was there, he looked fairly comfortable, you know. I think if he wouldn't have had those engine issues and maybe needed to nurse the car a little bit throughout the race, I think he would have probably gone on to get his first win of the season. But it was his first podium of the season. And I think we need to point out that Charles Leclerc had an absolutely amazing race. I know on my community tab, I put out a vote for driver of the day, and I don't think I've ever seen it so one-sided. Charles Leclerc came out on top by an absolute mile, and I think he was massively deserving of that. Then we had the two McLarens behind them, who also, I'm going to sing their praises, because Lando Norris is still on fire. Lando Norris now finds himself third in the Drivers' Championship again. It's not like he has just been there this one time. Again this season, he's managed to claw himself back into third place, ahead of Bottas, ahead of Perez, ahead of the Ferraris. Just amazing work from Lando Norris. Consistency is key. He's picked up points in every single race. And he is just making that just off the podium, 4th, 5th, 6th, his place to be, isn't he? Like, if Lando Norris isn't in the top 5, I'm almost a little bit lost. I'm a bit confused. I'm like, oh, Lando's having a bad weekend. If he's not in the top 4 or 5, that is the kind of standard that I'm now expecting from Lando Norris every single weekend. And that just sings praises beyond absolute belief. He has been absolutely phenomenal in that McLaren this season, and I will have nobody tell me any different. Daniel Ricciardo also looked like he found a little bit of pace out of nowhere. Whether it was just a good track for him, or whether the fact that he's been in the simulator has finally started to pay dividends for him, he looked a little bit better, didn't he? Not his perfect self, not that Danny Ricciardo that's going to dive into corners and cause chaos amongst everybody else, but he looked focused, he looked ready, and he was prepared to battle, especially with Carlos Sainz, who ended up just behind him. Carlos Sainz had an incredible race too, by the way, after coming together with Russell, starting from 11th after the sprint qualifying, really didn't go his way. I thought, finally, again, we're seeing that polarity that he has in the Ferrari, but finally, I think maybe in a couple of races, we'll see him qualify better and put some pressure on those McLarens, because he got behind Daniel Ricciardo but just couldn't quite find that little extra bit to get in front of him. And personally, I think he probably had a little bit better of a race than Daniel Ricciardo, but Daniel Ricciardo was very difficult to get past, and the Ferrari just couldn't find his way. So Carlos Sainz had an incredible race as well, and both Ferrari drivers, both McLaren drivers deserve a lot of praise after this weekend. They have both come to the fore, and both of those new drivers, Carlos Sainz and Daniel Ricciardo, are really showing their quality now in these cars. And I really hope that it can continue, because I'd love to see more battles between McLaren and Ferrari for those podium positions, you know, 3rd, 4th, 5th. Can they pick those up continually throughout the season and really start to battle with maybe a Bottas or a Perez? I really hope so. Let's move on to the rest of the field, because Fernando Alonso was the man to talk about this weekend. He had an incredible sprint qualifying. He turned sprint qualifying into his thing. I know it was the first ever sprint qualifying, but he was absolutely phenomenal. He just drove past everybody. He was up to 5th place at one point. Luckily, both of the McLarens, well, for me anyway, as a McLaren fan, luckily they were able to both get past him before the race on Sunday. But I think they could have struggled if he'd have managed to get in front of them again. He caused them real chaos, and that's why Leclerc looked so comfortable in the sprint qualifying, because Fernando Alonso had a train of cars behind him, and again he had a train of cars behind him on Sunday as well. I kind of think that points towards the fact that at this moment in time, we just really don't have the cars that are able to pass one another. And I'm hoping that 2022 is going to change that. Obviously, the cars will be able to get closer to one another, and therefore we might see some more racing and some more action, because Fernando Alonso had a real train of cars behind him. And if you're Fernando Alonso and you're finishing in 7th, you are having a dream day. But everybody behind him just looked frustrated and annoyed and couldn't get around him, and it just became a little bit of a train behind him, and that's not really what we want to see in Formula 1. We want to see those cars changing positions as often as possible. But you've got to give it to him. Fernando Alonso had an exceptional weekend, and so did Ocon. I'd like to point out Ocon, finally back in the points, got a brand new chassis, and looked a little bit like the driver we started the season with. I've been very critical of Ocon over the last few races, but finally it looked like he was back, comfortable in the Alpine, and picking up some points. And if we do look at the Drivers' Championship, yes, he is now 12 points behind Alonso, but I think he could make up that gap. We've got to remember, at the beginning of the season, we were talking about Ocon absolutely blitzing Alonso all of the time, and the fact that Alonso was talking about he just didn't know how he was going to catch up to Ocon. Now it's completely flipped his head. Ocon is now chasing, and I think he could do really well to catch up to Alonso. And if this chassis does now start to work for him, I think we're going to see big things from Alonso over the next couple of races. Then the Aston Martins, I felt really bad for Sebastian Vettel. It just went bad for him, didn't it? He had that spin and then nothing really came to fruition. He DNF'd. Luckily, Stroll was able to pick up some points for Aston Martin, but it was a bit of a weekend to forget for them. I don't think they had anything like the pace they wanted to have, and I think they'll be looking at Budapest to make some changes and make some steps forward. Then we had the rest of the field, and the rest of the field includes Perez. Perez had an atrocious weekend, by the way. Well, actually, he qualified quite well, but the sprint race really did not go his way. Sprint qualifying really did not go his way. And then once he was starting from the pit lane, the red flag, I thought, gave him a final opportunity to catch up to everyone really quickly. We're red flagged, he can get right up to the back of the grid. And it just didn't happen for him, did it? He really couldn't find his pace in that car this weekend. Couldn't find his way past so many people. Got bogged down in that train behind Fernando Alonso. Got bogged down behind Kimi Räikkönen for so long. It was a real weekend to forget for Perez. And I really liked that they pitted him at the end just to get that fastest lap of the race. Just to snatch that point off of Lewis Hamilton. Thought that was a very cheeky move from Red Bull. They probably could have got the point for Sergio Perez. He probably could have finished 9th or 10th. But they made sure, they absolutely guaranteed that Hamilton was not going to get that fastest lap. I thought that was very Christian Horner. Then we had George Russell. And I'm just going to talk about George Russell quickly because I talked about him so much in the Austrian Grand Prix. Again, another weekend of so very nearly. Another weekend of, it was so close, but just not quite there, wasn't it? It was another weekend where he qualified incredibly well. Got himself into Q3 in that Williams. I was absolutely mind blown. He is doing some incredible things in that Williams car. But then sprint qualifying didn't really go his way. Obviously had that touch with Carlos Sainz and got the 3-place grid penalty. And then it never really looked like it was going to work out for him from there, did it? It could have gone his way if Gasly and Tsunoda would have had issues towards the end of the Grand Prix. Maybe he could have picked up a point. But I think that point is just eluding him now. I think Austria was such a good opportunity for him to pick up points. Silverstone, again, I thought this was going to be the time. But now we move forward. Is it going to be Budapest? Is he finally going to break that curse and get a point in the Williams? I really hope so. I'd love to know what you think. Do you think he's going to get a point by the end of the season? And do you think he will get that move to Mercedes? Then, of course, we'll talk about the guys at the back, the other Latifi's, your Hasses. And nothing really happened of note, apart from a really lovely move that Mazepin made on Mick Schumacher, by the way. Mazepin has not been my favourite driver on the grid. Neither has Mick Schumacher really, although I have really enjoyed the Mick Schumacher-Sebastian Vettel bond. But Mazepin made an incredible move on Mick Schumacher. I really highly recommend that you go and watch it. It was an incredible pass from Mazepin. And maybe that shows that, you know, when he does get his new chassis in Budapest, maybe we might see a little inkling of something, just of a little bit of a higher quality from Mazepin, and maybe he can start to actually push his teammate that little bit more. But I highly recommend you go and see it because it was an incredible move. Final thing then, I'd love to know in the comments below, as I said, was it a racing incident, and what penalty would you have given Hamilton if you were to give him one at all? Would you not have given him a penalty? 5 second, 10-second grid drop at the end of the race? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. And as always, I absolutely love talking to you guys on the live streams. We will be live for qualifying and for the race in Budapest, so I hope to see you there as well. Thank you to everybody who joined the stream over the weekend. It was wonderful for my home Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like, subscribe, all of that good stuff, and I will see you next time.